All right, welcome back to the PCC podcast. And today we're going to be covering a topic that honestly just does not get enough love in this space. And honestly, just I have not been giving it enough love with our clients, with our listeners. So today we're going to be talking about training and the gym. And I'm really excited for this podcast today because there is a lot that we can be leaving on the table when it comes to training in the gym that most of us have either forgotten about or we don't really know about. And I know this because I actually did pretty much this entire exact talk for our clients first as a bit of a test run to see where everyone's head was at on these topics. And I was actually very surprised with the number of things that we did know, but didn't know in depth. So a lot of us have heard these concepts. We've heard these terms that I'm going to talk about today, but we don't actually know how to apply them when it comes to our training. And this is the kind of stuff that can really be costing you progress in your strength and your fat loss journey, because ultimately it's really a good thing that more women are going to the gym. Like, hands down, I absolutely love that. More women are going to the gym, more women are strength training specifically. Like, that is just a huge win for the fitness industry in general. However, there is a lot that is being left on the table when it comes to how we are actually training. And the best way that I can describe this in the most simple way possible is I've seen that most women who are in the gym are working out and strength training, but they are not training and they are not truly exercising with the purpose of reaching their goal behind it. So we're going to explain the difference, and we're going to explain exactly how to take yourself from spinning your wheels, kind of aimlessly working out in the gym, to training and seeing results. Okay. And how I've kind of and I do want to just give a second of background of how I have come across this topic. And it's honestly because I do form review with my clients. So not every single client does this because it depends on really where they're at in their strength training journey. There's a phase of strength training called newbie gains. That basically means when you start training, the neurological and muscular adaptations that are happening so quickly from such a minimal stimulus that you really don't need to know a lot of these things to make a ton of progress. So if you are brand new to the gym, this is something that I want you to bookmark and come back to in like 3 months. But once our clients pass that phase of maybe they've already been in the gym, they've already been strength training and they need this now, or they started off completely green and then they go a couple months and then they need this sort of thing. What got you from point A to point B does not get you to point C, right? And so we do form review, meaning our clients submit videos of themselves training to us as coaches, and we review that and give them form feedback on their actual form, which is such a big difference compared to just watching a video and being like, I think my body looks like that. No, like, you're going to get actual feedback. And yes, it's uncomfortable to film. Maybe it's awkward. Maybe people look at you, but how are you going to get better? Right. And so I think a lot of times I just hear from so many women, especially ones that I talk to in my DMs and ones that are inquiring about the program. It's like, I'm doing everything. Why am I not seeing results? And the reality is you can be doing a lot of the right things, but not applying all of the principles that are necessary in the way that they should be applied just because you don't know what you don't know. Or you could be consistent in the totally wrong direction, right? Like one example that is kind of lower level than at least this podcast, because everyone on this podcast at least knows that we should be strength training. Is that, I'm consistently doing cardio and getting steps in and eating healthy, but not seeing fat loss results. Well, the reason for that could be we are missing one huge piece of the puzzle, which is weight training, right? And so that is just one example of how that can be missed. But so let's get into, what exactly is missing, right? So first and foremost, if you are just getting started with weight training, basically anything that you do for probably the first 3 to 6 months will honestly give you a lot of really great results. You'll get a lot of physiological and neurological adaptations from just moving some dumbbells around, even if they're not that heavy or you're not pushing yourself that hard. So going into the gym and doing what feels good that day, following a daily workout subscription, feeling the burn is fine, maybe in that time period. But once you get past doing just basic strength training for a short period of time, the newbie gains are going to be over. And then just following workouts and feeling like you're pushing yourself is not enough to say, I'm doing everything I need to do to make progress. And the beautiful thing about this is that none of it takes more time. Like once you know exactly what you need to focus on, none of it takes more time off your plate, which is one of the biggest kind of objections that I hear is like, I don't have more time for something new. Well, you don't need more time. You just need this knowledge to then apply your time differently in the gym. Okay, so let's talk about the main principles that we are missing when we are training. So number one is progressive overload. Now, this is one of those ones where I said, I'm surprised that so many of us knew the terms, but when it came to actually knowing what this meant, the number of people that understood it was very little. So progressive overload, the general gist of this word and this phrase means do more over the course of time, like adapt and get stronger. However, what does that actually look like, right? So I'm going to explain the most basic way that you can track progression in the gym. And if you didn't know this is a wonderful place to start. And you could honestly probably go years with just knowing this one principle and make a ton more progress. And that is the auto-regulated double progression model of progressive overload. And now that's a fancy term. You don't need to know exactly what it means, but what you do need to know is that essentially when you are programmed exercises in the gym, it's going to be a certain amount of sets for a certain amount of reps. And then you're going to obviously use a certain weight for that, right? And so I'm going to use a classic example of 4 sets of 10 to 12. And in all of these examples and how we program for our clients, we're typically going to use a rep range for most exercises that's going to have a broader range of reps that someone can move between for this purpose. And that's why if your program literally just reads like 3 by 10 and that's it, that's your first red flag. So 3 sets of 10 to 12, right? What do we do here? We're going to pick a weight that feels challenging for those 3 sets of 10 to 12. And then we're going to see where we fall by pushing ourselves and seeing how many reps we can get. So maybe the first week that you do this, you get 3 sets of 10. The next week, what you're going to want to aim to do is max out that rep range with the same weight, right? Because it wouldn't totally make sense to just jump up in weight yet if you didn't totally max out the rep ranges. So then you're going to go for that 3 by 12. The following week, it would not make sense to do 3 by 12 again because you already did that. The goal is to improve every week, is to overload every week. So the next week, you're going to go up in the next increment of weight and go for the 3 by 10 again. And the cool thing is that, when you are doing this and tracking progress in a particular movement, it will get to the point where you are really just eking out like 1 rep across all of your sets. So if I have 4 sets of 10 to 12, if I'm more advanced, how that's really going to look is 10, 10, and 11 as my 3 sets. And that 11th rep on the last set is going to be an absolute grinder, right? So that is how we want to progress through all of our exercises and making sure that we are just tracking it on a week to week, right? Like if we are following a program, we want to make sure that we're actually progressing. And this is why we have our clients change up their programming maybe every 6 to 8 weeks rather than every 2, every 3, every 4 weeks, or every week. Because if you're doing the same movements over and over again, it takes some time to actually get to your strongest in any movement with this model. Okay. Now, progressive overload is not just limited to what we just discussed. And this is really important. This is where a lot of people have this rudimentary understanding of progressive overload, but they don't know what else is left on the table. So when you are doing the autoregulated double progression model, there will come a certain point where certain exercises you're going to cap out. Like maybe it's a lateral raise because that muscle group is just so small. Maybe it's a leg press because you're pushing multiple plates on both sides of the leg press and your legs are tapped out. Okay. So what else can we do to increase progressive overload? There is more. So the first thing, there's 3 that I'm going to go over, is the quality of your reps. Okay. So this is going to include things like range of motion. This is going to include things like control and tempo. This is going to include things like mind-muscle connection. Okay, so let's talk about those 3 things. Number 1, range of motion. How far through the range of motion are you able to do this movement? Think about things like a squat and how like gym memes always make fun of people for half squatting, right? Now, partially your range of motion is going to be affected by your mobility, your limb lengths and things like that. Some of those things you can help and some of them you can't. So obviously we want to do what is safe here. But if your range of motion is limited because you have not practiced this movement, as you get more skilled at it, you're going to want to do the motion with a greater range of motion. And what we find is that when the weight is a little too heavy for us, our range of motion actually caps out wherever our sticking point is. You'll notice this a lot of times if you're doing like a bench press or a shoulder press and you have a weight that's really, really heavy in your hands. And you'll see people at the gym do this. They're like moving like 3 inches at a time from the top down, and they're not really getting that full 90-degree bend at the elbow or things like that on a overhead press or bench press or on a squat, right? Like they're just barely like breaking at the hips and the knees, but they're not really getting to parallel. So that's oftentimes if the weight is too heavy because our nervous system literally stops us from going to the full range of motion because our body's afraid of hurting itself. It's a great protection mechanism. So if that's the case, you're going to want to go down in weight and really focus on the full range of motion for reps. So for a lot of upper body movements, that's going to mean the full bend at the elbow. It's going to mean really kind of bringing the weight through the entire range of motion. For our squats, our deadlifts and things, it means actually going through the full motion as much as we can. In squats, getting as much depth as possible. Okay. In terms of, so that's range of motion, but there's 2 other pieces, right? Time under tension is the second. Time under tension is the amount of time that we are spending under tension. Simply said, what does that mean? It means when we are under load. So if I were to do a set of 10 barbell back squats and at the 8th rep, I'm getting really tired and I just put the bar back for like 5 seconds and then I go back under and then I do the last 2 reps. That is breaking time under tension because I have completely taken the load off of my body, right? Versus if I just kind of stood there and took a couple deep breaths with the bar on my back, that would actually increase the time under tension because I'm still standing under load. In addition, if your coaches have ever programmed you something like a tempo, like 3 seconds down, 1 second pause, 1 second pause at the top, anything like that, any sort of coded tempo is going to be added time under tension, spending more time with your muscles, actually holding that load and trying to control it. Okay, so that is going to make the movement more difficult because, for example, if you're spending 6 or 7 seconds per rep in a movement compared to 1 or 2, you are holding that amount of weight for so much longer with the muscles that they are going to be a little bit more strained, and it might make the same set of 10 feel a lot harder. Next up, we're going to have our mind-muscle connection, and this is the connection between our brain and actually thinking about the movement and the muscle group that we're targeting. Now, this is going to, of course, make us actually have to ask the question, what is this movement for? Which we don't always know, right? But I'll give some simple examples, right? If we are doing a leg extension, a lot of times on the machine, there's going to be a little picture of the person sitting on the leg extension, and there's going to be the lit up portion of the quadricep that's going to be lighting up. And that's signifying to us that's what we should be feeling in the movement, right? And a classic example of not having mind-muscle connection in this exercise is feeling it in your knees, right? And this is actually something that we have a lot more control over than most people like to admit, especially those who like to complain about not liking certain movements. For example, with the leg extension, you can exhibit better mind muscle connection by focusing on that quad muscle actually lengthening and contracting rather than just thinking about pushing the pad up and down. So for most movements, the way you want to increase mind muscle connection is number one, figure out what muscle group the movement is actually targeting. And then from there, think about and learn how that muscle actually attaches to the different joints of your body. And then think about the muscle fibers contracting and stretching from that angle. So for example, I'm going to use a super simple example to make this very clear because a lot of you are going to be listening audio only. I'm going to do my best. If you are watching this on video, you're going to be very lucky. So let's use the biceps, for example. So the bicep inserts at the shoulder joint and inserts at the elbow joint. So just below the shoulder joint where the shoulder and the deltoid kind of finishes off, and then at the elbow. And the muscle runs exactly long ways. So straight up and down between the elbow and the shoulder. And so if you think about the muscle fibers in the bicep stretching, which way is your bicep curl going to be going when the muscles are stretching? The hand is going to be going from the shoulder down to the hip, right? Because those muscles are going to be pulling apart. And if you cross your fingers across from each other as if you were like making an accordion, this is what our muscle fibers do. So when we are contracting our muscles, it's like we are pushing our fingers against each other and we are completely crossing our hands as if we're going to make as if we're going to be like praying and crossing our fingers across each other. And when our muscles are stretching, we are going to be pulling those apart and pulling our hands completely separate. And this is literally what our muscles look like when they are contracting and stretching, is they're like sliding across each other. And so think about that when you're doing the bicep curl. As your hand comes from your shoulder down to your hip with the weight in your hand and the bicep muscle stretches, think about long ways your muscles actually stretching. And then when you pull your hand up to your shoulder for a bicep curl, think about those same muscle fibers shortening and coming together long ways. Okay. That is mind muscle connection, is actually feeling that happen. And so it's going to take a little bit of studying up. A lot of times though, you get really lucky and the machines on the gym and the videos that we provide and things like that will easily show you where the muscle fibers run. For example, your glute muscles run kind of at a diagonal. So they actually, when they stretch, you want to think about if you were to like bend over, when your glutes stretch, they actually stretch kind of like outwards as you're bending back. So, different ways to look at it. But again, progressive overload. We're going to use the auto-regulated double progression model. We're going to think about our quality of reps here, and we're going to use mind muscle connection, a greater range of motion, and increased time under tension to make the reps harder if we are maxed out with just the basic double progression model. Okay, now there's some more things that we could be missing in the gym when it comes to progressing, pushing ourselves, actually training. The next piece here is going to be our proximity to failure. So this is how far are you actually pushing yourself until the point that your muscles actually give out. It's actually not best to push yourself to total failure for every set. The example that I like to give is if you actually gave that a go, if you have 3 sets and they were just all to failure, you might get 20 reps on the first set, but it's going to take you forever to recover from that first set. The second set, you might get like 7 or 8 reps because you're just so gassed. And then by the third set, you're going to get like 3. So in total, you might get 30 reps max. But if you had 3 sets of 12 programmed and you kept yourself shy from failure for those 3 sets of 12, then you might be able to get 36 reps, right? And maybe on that last set, if you went to failure, then maybe you would get 15 on the last set, and then maybe you would get 39 reps. And that is going to accumulate the progress that you make. And that is just one example of how training to failure all the time can actually hinder your progress because it's not actually going to build the volume that you need across all the sets that you're doing. But For the most part, that's really not our issue. For the most part, especially with women, we're just not getting anywhere near the proximity to failure that we want. So maybe you're the type of person that takes it too far. That lesson should help you there. And we want to stay one or two shy reps of failure. But for most people, we want to actually push ourselves farther. So what I'd actually recommend for some of you is if you have never reached true muscular failure in the gym, what I want you to do is go pick a super safe exercise like a bicep curl with dumbbells or a leg extension machine. And I want you to actually push that exercise to the point where your legs or your arms cannot, right? Disclaimer, we are not doing this with a barbell squat. We are not doing this with a deadlift. We're not doing this with anything we can drop on our face or our feet or any part of our body. We are doing this with a controlled, easy exercise that is very, very safe. And I am not going to be held liable for any injuries that happen regardless. If you go to try this, remember this podcast is for educational purposes only, and I will not be held liable for anything that comes from that. But if you do give it a try, hypothetically, what you will notice is the weight that you use going to failure. You're going to notice you're probably going to get a lot more reps when you actually hit the point of failure than what you're doing thinking that you're getting close to failure, right? And so one way that we can quantify this after we really understand what failure feels like and looks like is with the RPE or RIR scales. Okay, so these are two different scales to measure rate of perceived exertion or the reps in reserve respectively. The rate of perceived exertion actually came from endurance training, and it's just a scale of 1 to 10 with exactly what you would think. 1 is as easy as possible and 10 is impossible. And RIR is the opposite. It's talking about how many reps you have left in the tank, and it's actually the exact inverse of RPE. So 1 RIR is I could have eked out 1 more. 2 is could have done 2 more. 3 is could have done 3 more, etc. And an RPE 10 is I could have done 0 more. RPE 9 is I could have done 1 more, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so we want to be at about a 7 to 8 RPE for the majority of our training session. And then if we are going to go to failure, it's typically going to be at the end of a workout and probably the last set of any exercise rather than the first, just so that we can build the appropriate volume that we need and not fatigue ourselves in those important exercises, right? Next issue that I'm seeing is working sets versus warm-up sets. What a lot of y'all are doing is using the sets that are programmed for you in a way that's actually wasting your efforts. Meaning, if you can theoretically do 3 sets of 10 of, let's say, a leg press at 200 pounds, but 200 pounds takes a little bit to kind of like load up, put the weights on, all that. So you kind of like add weights as you go and you're tracking set 1, maybe 150 pounds. You're like, cool, that was awesome. Set 2, 180 pounds. Awesome. Set 3, 200 pounds. You're like, awesome. I'm so strong. I got up to 200 pounds. The problem is you could have done all 3 sets with 200 pounds, but you sandbagged yourself and the first 2 sets aren't really doing anything for you. So make sure that you actually get up to the weight that you need to be using that is challenging. And as you follow a program, this is why program hopping and just jumping from program to program or mixing up your workouts every week is never going to get you the progress that you want. Because if you're not repeating exercises week over week over week, then guess what? You're never really going to know what that weight actually is, right? And so it takes a little bit of time to kind of calibrate and know where your strength really is at. That's why following a program is so important. But we call these sets working sets instead of acclimating or warm-up sets. So as you stack and add weight and get to the weight that you're using, those are called warm-up or acclimating sets. And your working sets is when you are actually putting in the full effort with the weight that you should be. Don't mistake these for each other. Lastly, we have bracing and breathing. So a lot of us, I've noticed, are not appropriately bracing or grounding our exercises, which is costing us some strength, honestly, some stability and some safety too, and our breathing. So I'm going to cover bracing first. And so this will actually kind of go into some setup logistics for things like bench press, for things like squats, for things like overhead press even. Is when we are bracing, we're not just talking about bracing our core. Yes, we want to tighten and brace our core and really make sure that our torso is stacked, meaning our rib cage is not flared up, our pelvis is not tilted in any sort of way. We want everything to be neutral, and we want to lock that in. I do have a video on my Instagram page that walks you through this. If you're not familiar with what that looks like, I have a visual there for you. Now, another part of bracing is how you're actually set up relative to the ground. Let's say on a bench press. If you're on a flat bench press, you're doing dumbbell, barbell, whatever, you're actually going to want to have multiple points of contact to the bench and the ground. So number one being your shoulder blades. You want your shoulder blades pinned back and pinched back onto the bench. You want your butt solidly on the bench. Do not let that thing up. If it is up, the weight is too heavy. The next is going to be your feet. You want both your feet solidly on the ground, like can be flat on the ground and can push out of that. And when you have all of those points of contact, you're actually able to push your feet into the ground and transfer force from pushing your feet into the ground up to your bench press. The same goes for the overhead press. The same goes for any sort of movement that's in a bench. You can actually really brace your entire body and make it a full body movement rather than something that is in isolation and only using your upper body and your arms. And this is where bracing your core comes into play, because your core holds all of your limbs together. So if you're trying to transfer force from your legs to your arms, well, guess what? You're going to need your core to be involved too. So make sure that you learn a little bit about things like leg drive, the points of contact, and actually setting up appropriately for a movement to get the most out of it. And if you're at something like a bench press plateau, like this is what you can turn to really turn that around. And then with that, breathing. A lot of us are hyperventilating while we're lifting, and it's funny, right? It looks funny in a video, but it's really ineffective, and we could be doing something even better to be able to get more progress. And that is being able to breathe in on the eccentric, when the weight is coming down on us, when the muscle is stretching, the eccentric, that's what that's called. So think about the muscle fibers lengthening. That's when you're going to breathe in. That's why we had to learn that earlier, right? And then we're going to breathe out when we are pushing out. And this is, we are also bracing our core. We're pushing through our feet. We're pushing through our arms. We're pushing through our core, and we're breathing out. And this is going to exert more force from our body by having this rhythm to our breathing rather than just hyperventilating and feeling in pain. So there is even more to advanced training techniques that I did not cover today, but in the interest of time, I'm going to leave it at that for this episode. So there's a lot that we could be leaving on the table. So make sure that you are using progressive overload in all forms of it. You're going to a close proximity to failure. You're doing actual working sets. You're not program hopping, and you're bracing and you're breathing appropriately. And that, my friend, is called training in the gym. And that's how you can ensure that you're not costing yourself fat loss or muscle gain progress. Okay, that's going to be it from me today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you back here next week.